We're back at the table with this week's line panelists. Now, Hector Balderas is the new Attorney General in New Mexico. He recently released that behavioral health audit that's been the source of a lot of controversy for a couple of years now. In 2013, the Martinez administration said the audit showed that 15 providers committed Medicaid fraud, allegedly. The administration then shut down those providers and brought in new providers from Arizona. And several organizations, including media outlets, have sought to gain access to the full audit since 2013. And Janice, you know, I appreciate what Mr. Balderas is doing. It's interesting to parse your way through a redacted report. Simple question here. Does the public finally have exactly what it needs here, or is it just the beginning of something?
It's just the beginning.
Gotcha.
You know, I look at this, and here are the questions, because I read through the report. Mm-hmm. So we have an audit that followed no procedures. Right. If you are being audited and you have discrepancies, usually you get to at least be confronted by the data. Mm-hmm. That hasn't happened. Mm-hmm. We have a complete change in doing business based on the belief that there was fraud, right. And a statement that says that Medicaid must, if you have Medicaid dollars, you have to stop, cease and desist. I can't find that. Right. And so now we have a series of businesses that have been irreparably harmed. Right. And so I think that Attorney General Hector Balderas did the right thing, but it is the first step. I have a lot more questions now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. John, did you see anything in this audit that says to you, why was this held back by the previous Attorney General? Was there anything in it that says to you, I can't, you know, we're not going to relitigate it, so you know what I'm saying, but was there anything that incendiary that would keep you from releasing it?
You know, in all honesty, I don't understand why it wasn't released before. Mm-hmm. The only thing that I would say is that there investigations, criminal investigations or civil investigations are not generally covered by the Inspection of Public Records Act. But given the fact that, and so technically speaking, maybe there was a reason that you could say it's defensible, but in the moment, it's just indefensible because it so clearly needed to be exposed to public view. Mm-hmm.
How different would the conversation have been in your mind if it had been released back last fall? Or earlier, excuse me, not last fall.
Well, I think Janice points out, I mean, I have a hard time calling this an audit.
Okay.
I mean, because I do financial cases for a living. I sue people for securities fraud, for example. This has none of the hallmarks of an audit. It's kind of like using the word audit to make up a fancy word for something that is really kind of a report that is not particularly well done.
Interesting.
And so to put people out of business, and more importantly, all those business and providers whose lives have been ruined in many ways, their professional lives have been ruined by this, that's bad. But what is worse is the level of service that has decreased massively. And now we're getting some of these new providers are going to be leaving the state because they don't want to serve southeast or southwestern New Mexico. And so I just don't know how we're going to get the genie back in the bottle on this whole problem.
Yeah,
well, if I might just throw in, so John is the only attorney here. I saw in the report an accusation of overbilling, which could be a mistake, it could be a process, but never defined as fraud. How do you take that?
Well, I will say much of the findings are just not fraud. I mean, forgetting a signature on a form is not fraud. I mean, it could be, but really, rarely could it be. Usually, a false signature is a form of fraud, like if I forge a name. Right. And so we're tossing around words like audit and fraud, and a vast majority of what is covered in there. And I think Attorney General Balderas has done a good job. There are a couple of providers that are potentially facing some serious legal consequences to their conduct. And I think he's been careful to say, look, I'm not exonerating these people. But what I am doing is I am saying that a lot of this stuff should be in public view. And I think a lot of it, from my experience, is not fraud.
Interesting. Tom, something John said, it seemed padded in some sections. Like awful lot of information was repeating itself throughout the course of this audit. And I've just got to wonder how one would take it as one of these providers when you finally see this thing. Do you know what I mean? It's like, wait a minute now.
If I was one of these providers, I would be through the roof. Right. I'd be in orbit right now because, you know, to pad, I think, is good. Not a lot of substance. Right. And to have not a lot of substance determine that so many New Mexico businesses went out of business. Right. And that other companies were brought in and aren't being successful as I mean that, and then a whole segment of population cannot get the behavioral health services that they need. You know, a part of me, the conspiracy theorist, and this is really going to sound whacked out there, but what if There was some kind of, this was the area that the governor and the attorney general decided, you know what, we're going to engage on every area except this one.
Right.
Because I think that had the audit been released, the discussion, the outcome probably still the same, but the discussion during the campaign would have been very, very, very different.
Interesting.
So it's just, this whole thing just bothers me, but I say that congratulations to Attorney General Balderas. He has definitely earned his title and his position. Not even a month into his office, he's releasing this and already defining his predecessor as being, as not being the kind of person that Gary King would want to be remembered as.
Hear ya. Jeff, as a reporter, you certainly have to have redacted stuff. Nobody needs names and all that kind of stuff. Did you get everything you needed out of that? What was missing when you turned to report on this thing?
I will say it's kind of two different issues here from a journalist perspective. It's not a story that I personally have covered really closely, but there's one side of it that's the stuff that these guys have already talked about in terms of the shakeup, the cost to people who benefit from these kinds of services. And frankly, there's a whole other area there that's connected to what we were talking about before with the police. I mean, if we really talk about the kind of services that were shut off as a result of this. The piece of it that I'm a little more comfortable talking about and more familiar with is the transparency piece of this. And I will say that I was incredibly heartened to see that the Attorney General, who is the person in this state who's responsible for enforcing the Inspection of Public Records Act, has signaled that he is going to look at the so-called law enforcement exception to that law in the narrow way in which it was written. Because frequently, as a guy who covered cops for 12 years and still does in a lot of ways, I've heard ongoing investigation over and over and over again. And that is not a catch-all reason defined in the law to keep records from the public's view. So it's really nice to see that he took a look at this and said, I don't think the overwhelming majority of these 339 pages meet the law enforcement exception. So that's a great thing to see.
Wow, I'm glad you threw that in. That's very interesting. Yeah.
That's a good point because the Attorney General is charged with interpreting that statute and giving opinions on that. So that's a good point that Jeff is making. That could blow up some more records for public exposure.
Interesting example of leadership and what can happen. I mean, it's an old saying in business: when you're stuck, just do something. It starts the dominoes falling over. We have some dominoes falling over now.
I think we do. And one of the things that I'm sure that the Attorney General is very cognizant of when the taxpayer pays for an audit. And as the auditor, he was very sensitive to this, that you are entitled to that information. That is why we do audits. But audits, again, are corrective. They are not punitive. Big difference. Big difference.
Let me stay with you on this. Back to the audit itself. Again, my sense that they took great pains to drop in those key words like everywhere.
Yes.
Fraud here, fraud there. It just seemed like it was a hammer looking for a nail. Do you know what? On paper, it had that feel to it. Was that your sense as well?
Well, I would say, so I go back to the first question is, where in the Medicaid federal statutes does it say that if you have a suspicion of fraud, you have to withdraw all dollars?
That's right.
I can't find it.
I'm glad you came back to
And
that.
I don't know, but that was my question.
Right. What are the legal recourses for anybody here for the behavioral health side? Does anybody have, now that this is out, does that change their position if they were planning to do something? And it's interesting.
Maybe, and I haven't thought through it deeply, so I certainly don't want to weigh in on somebody's perhaps pending case or something on something that I haven't analyzed. I do want to remind everybody of this company that did the so-called audit had developed this kind of template for doing this in other places, and this was kind of their business.
Right.
So I think in your analogy of a nail looking for a hammer or a hammer looking for a nail, however you want to say it, it's kind of there. They get paid to do a particular job that they kind of created this template. And what it includes is sampling. Now normally when you draw random samples of documents, you can't make a fraud case based on that.
I see.
But fraud is a very difficult kind of legal standard to meet. You have to have particularity, you have to have it go document by document. I've never seen a fraud case carried forward with a sampling procedure. And so it's very unfair to the people. And so, I'm sure they're talking with lawyers and, maybe they have recourse.
As he talks about fraud, one of the components of fraud, if I'm not mistaken, is intent to take. Is that close?
It is. You got
And,
it.
Okay.
and being bumbling administrators, unfortunately, I mean, I want to clean that up as much as
Sure.
anything else. That is waste. I don't like it.
Right.
But that's very different than intending to take what is not yours. And I believe that's fraud.
You know, I think most folks would agree with that, what Representative is saying. Does that make sense to you? There's a
Yeah.
difference there, isn't there?
Oh, there
Yeah.
is. There is a big difference. And, you know, as you know, how do you define what's going to be happening moving forward? You know, I
Yeah.
think we're all going to be watching to see, you know, how the Attorney General moves forward, how behavioral health services responds in meeting those needs. But I'd also be very interested to see how those three organizations for the three completed cases, the three cleared companies, how, if they even try to recover, you know, how do they go about rebuilding their namesake and stuff? Because, you know, those are real jobs, those are real people, and, you know, that's, I just will not stop thinking about the impact that this bureaucratic action took on real lives of real New Mexico residents.
Interesting. Up next, we sit down with District Attorney Carrie Brandenburg, who recently filed charges against those two APD officers involved in the fatal shooting of a homeless man here in Albuquerque last year.